Hey y'all, let's talk about the cardiovascular system. So cardiovascular system is the heart and vasculature system. Okay, so cardiovascular. Let me make sure I'm in focus. Yes. Okay. So cardiovascular, this has to do with the heart and then all of the tubing that's associated with it, so the vasculature. And so let's start with the heart. So I like to think of the heart as a bunch of boxes. Okay, so we have, and it should be more even than this, and really the heart is two pumps back to back, okay? So and when we're looking at a heart, the way that anatomical structure works is that you're looking down at a patient, basically. So what you're looking at on your left, so on this side, is actually the right side of the person you're looking at, okay? And then this is the left side. And if you're talking about the top of the heart, you're talking about the atria, okay, or the atrium in an atrium. And then the bottom is the ventricle, are the ventricles, okay? So when we look at the heart this way, we have the right atrium, which opens into the right ventricle, and then it leaves the heart, okay? So whenever you have blood coming into the heart, and I'm going to do it in orange, and we're going to talk about why I'm not using blue and red in a second, but blood enters the heart through the right atrium. It goes through a valve into the right ventricle. Okay, so this valve is a one-way valve because we don't want blood pushing back into the atrium. It's not efficient, okay? And then it actually leaves the system through this tube that goes this way. Whoop, and there's another valve here. Whoop. Okay, so then there's no interaction between the right and the left sides ever. You could actually split the heart and have these two things be completely separate and it would work the same way. It just wouldn't be as strong. So by having the heart together like this, you actually get this ring of muscles that can kind of squeeze really hard together, and so you can get a bigger pump. Okay, so we have blood comes in through the right atrium, goes through this one-way valve into the right ventricle, and then leaves to go into the pulmonary circuit. Okay, so the pulmonary circuit we'll talk about in a second. Might as well talk about it now. So the pulmonary circuit is the circuit that goes to the lungs. Okay, so pulmonary means lung. And you might be saying, but wait, we just finished the respiratory system. Why do you care about pulmonary? Well, cardiovasculature and the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system are very intimately associated, okay? So the cardiovascular system's function is all about moving blood through the body. Whether you move blood through the body so that you can move oxygen around to all the tissues that need it, okay? In order to do that, you have to go to the place where the oxygen is. Remember we talked about the alveoli at the end of the bronchioles are covered in pulmonary capillaries, okay? Well, the capillaries are part of the cardiovascular system. Okay, so when blood enters the heart on the right atrium side, it's deoxygenated. Okay, so there's no oxygen on the right side of the heart. Okay, so no oxygen. Okay, then it leaves and it goes into the pulmonary circuit. So if we were to do it this way, and we said the right atrium enters the right, can you still see it? Yeah, right ventricle, which then goes through the pulmonary circuit. Specifically, if you're leaving the heart, you're leaving through an artery. Okay, we'll talk about arteries are more muscular. Okay, an artery is always something that's leaving the heart. Arteries never lead towards the heart. And in the pulmonary system, arteries are always deoxygenated. So this is still deoxygenated, so there's still no oxygen. Okay, the pulmonary artery enters the lungs and becomes the pulmonary arterioles. Okay, so pulmonary arterioles. That just means they're smaller and smaller arteries and eventually end up in the pulmonary capillaries. Capillaries. So this is a very fine net-like structure that covers each of the alveoli. And this is so this is all deoxygenated. Okay? And in the pulmonary capillaries, oxygen is picked up. And carbon dioxide is left behind. We'll say. So the carbon dioxide that hasn't been put into some kind of a buffering system in the blood goes into the alveoli to be exhaled, okay? So now all of a sudden, blood is now oxygenated, okay? So I'm going to draw this as a big old circle to kind of keep this going. So the pulmonary capillaries come together as pulmonary venules, because a venule is a small version of a pulmonary vein. Well, veins always are small versions of, okay. we have the biggest vessels we have, like if we're talking arteries are going to split into arterioles. Arterioles split into capillary beds. The capillary beds then come together as venules, and then the venules come together as veins. Okay, so we go from the artery to the arteriole. The arteriole splits a bunch into the capillaries, and then the capillaries come together as venules. The venules come together as veins. Okay, so arteries are very muscular. Okay, because they are assisting the heart in pumping blood through the body. Arterioles aren't as muscular because they're not as big. Capillary beds are basically one cell thick, so there's no muscle in there. They're very leaky because that is really important. You don't want to have very, you want them to be leaky so that they can absorb nutrients and get rid of waste and all these other things, okay? Venules are now collecting the blood that is leaving the capillary bed, okay, and it's going to collect them into veins, and then veins are going to go back to the heart. So veins always go to the heart. Arteries always go away from the heart. So arteries are away, veins are towards. Arteries are not always oxygenated. Arteries are not oxygenated in the pulmonary system because they're going to the lungs, okay? So the arteries in the pulmonary circuit are going to the lungs, so they don't have oxygen. The pulmonary vein, so veins are not always deoxygenated. The pulmonary vein, which is going from the lung to the heart, okay, to the left atrium, is oxygenated. This is the only oxygenated vein system in the heart, okay? So this is the left atrium of the heart. The left atrium goes through, so then if we're coming back from the pulmonary system, we're going into the left atrium. We're going to go through another valve into the left ventricle. When we go then through the left ventricle, we're going to lead through another, there's another tube here leading out, and there's another one-way valve. We're going to leave and go back to the body, okay? So we go left atrium, left ventricle. We're going to leave into the systemic arteries, a systemic system, okay? The biggest systemic artery is the aorta, okay? The biggest, we're going to get back to that, okay? The aorta is the big old artery coming off the heart. It's you have a big arch to it here, okay? So it's got a big arch. The aorta is then going to split into systemic arteries, okay, and go wherever it needs to go. The systemic arteries are going to split into systemic arterioles. The systemic arterioles are then going to split into systemic capillaries. So systemic means body system. So this is everything else in the body that isn't pulmonary, okay? So this is your muscles, your digestive system, your brain, your kidneys, anything that's not pulmonary, okay? These systemic capillaries, okay, so all of this, by the way, from here all the way to here, this is all oxygenated. Okay, so these all have oxygen, and then oxygen gets dropped off at whatever tissue the blood is going to, okay? And then we have the systemic capillaries coming together to create systemic venules. These systemic venules come together to make systemic veins, and the systemic veins all collect together into our largest systemic vein, the vena cava, and go back to the right atrium, and the whole system starts again, okay? So if I don't really have a highlighter, but so if I were to highlight these awkwardly, let's say deoxygenated is yellow, then these are the ones that are deoxygenated. It starts in the capillary bed, the systemic capillary bed, the right atrium, the right ventricle, the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary arterioles, and then the pulmonary capillaries about halfway through, they become oxygenated because they're picking up the oxygen from the lungs. So then the pulmonary veins are oxygenated, the venules, the veins, the left atrium, left ventricle, the systemic arteries, the systemic, did I write systemic arteries twice? I did. Well, that's fun. We only need one set. That's fine. Systemic arteries like the aorta, the systemic arterioles, and then they get to the capillary beds, they drop off that oxygen. So you can see it's a gigantic circle. And it's just really important to remember the order of what these things do. Hint, hint. Make sure you remember the order of how a blood molecule, a blood cell or a hemoglobin molecule or an oxygen molecule travels through the body system. Okay, let's talk about heart rate and blood pressure a little bit. So, the lub-dub of our heart rate actually has to do, so the what we hear when our heart is beating, that lub-dub, is actually the closing of valves in our heart. And they close with so much force that we can hear them throughout our entire body, okay? It echoes through the fluid of our cardiovascular system, and then we can hear it, okay? You can actually technically always hear it, but you aren't paying attention normally, and there's just other sounds that kind of drown it out, okay? But if it's really quiet, you can hear your heart rate, you can hear your heart beating, okay? And so what's happening? So what's actually happening is during the lub stage, well, let's just go this way. It's easier to kind of talk about the systole, and that's an L, systole, and the diastole. Okay, so systole or systole is when your ventricles, the very, very muscular bottom part of your heart, contract, okay? That forces blood out of the heart. Forces blood out of, and remember on the right side, it's going to be forced out of the pulmonary circuit of heart into pulmonary circuit, and on the left side it's going to be forced into the systemic circuit. Here is a bug. Okay, so that's systole. That's a really strong push of blood. Diastole is when the ventricles relax. Okay, and this is called a vital sign, because if you don't have a heart rate, you are not alive, okay? That is a very simple way to tell if someone is alive or not, is to tell if they have a heart rate, okay? We also know that if you're exercising, so let us step back just a second. So what is the point of the cardiovascular system? What is the function of the cardiovascular system? It is to move blood around, so the CV function is to move blood through the body. Okay, and what is the point of moving blood around the body? You're moving oxygen to where it's needed. And why do we need oxygen at all? We have to have oxygen to do respiration. We have to have respiration to make ATP. We have to breathe to be alive, right? And so because we are aerobic organisms. So in order to have functional muscles and everything else in our body, we have to move oxygen around to the parts of the body that need it, okay? So if you are working out, okay, if you're exercising, or if you're stressed because your body's getting ready to exercise to run away from something scary, even if it's a test, because our brains don't know any better, if you're exercising or stressed, heart rate increases. Why? Because the body wants to deliver more oxygen faster. So the body believes, or the brain believes, that your body needs more oxygen. Okay, so the faster your heart is beating, the faster that oxygen is getting delivered through your body. Now, there's an upper limit to this. If the blood is traveling through the capillary too fast, it doesn't have time to drop off oxygen where it's needed. And so it's actually really dangerous to have too high of a heart rate, okay, because you actually just won't be able to do diffusion at all. Okay, so exercising or being stressed out will increase your heart rate because your body wants to move more oxygen around to different parts of the body. So that means that you're also going to breathe faster and heavier so that you can get more oxygen into your blood faster too. Okay, so what else do we know about the cardiovascular system? We could talk a lot about blood pressure. Blood pressure is another vital sign that we take, okay? Because and when we're talking about numbers, we're talking about the systole over diastole. Because we're talking about, okay, whenever you do blood pressure, you want to know your two numbers. You can't just take blood pressure at one point and be like, you're fine, you're healthy. Because when you're looking at systole, you're looking at the contraction of muscles. When you're looking at diastole, you're looking at the relaxation. Okay, so you have to know that your heart is pumping hard enough, but then also filling up enough with enough blood. If these numbers are off, then their heart's not working properly. Okay, so something is weird. And blood pressure can be affected by a lot of things. It can be affected by clots. It can be affected by stress, which can lead to clots. It can be affected by diet. It can be affected by mood. Okay, so many things affect blood pressure. If your blood pressure is too high, these clots can become detached. Okay, and that's dangerous. If clots become detached, they can block arteries. Okay, if they block arteries, they can block the oxygen flow. This is really dangerous, okay? And there's two big examples we talk about. So anytime a clot is traveling through your blood system, it's called an embolism. So if you hear someone having an embolism, that's just a traveling clot, okay? If you have a clot in the brain, and it actually makes oxygen not get to parts of the brain, that's called a stroke, okay? And if you have a stroke, what's happening is oxygen's not getting delivered to parts of your brain, and those parts of your brain die. Now, you can usually survive these depending on what part of your brain gets it. So if the medulla gets a stroke, that's usually really dangerous because those are parts of the brain. The medulla and other parts of the brainstem control breathing, breathing, balance, digestion. All of these things are very involuntary, and if you aren't doing those things, you die, okay? But if you have a stroke in part of your brain that, like, controls holding one side of your face under your own muscular control, that can be survivable, okay? So that's not as big a deal. It's definitely dangerous, but it's not, you can survive it, okay? If that clot goes to the heart, and not into the heart itself, not inside the arteries and the ventricles, but the heart muscles that actually make the heart beat, you can die very quickly because this is a heart attack. And what that means is that the heart itself is not getting oxygen it needs to continue pumping the heart, okay? And so if your heart is not getting oxygen, the muscles are going to cramp, and eventually they're going to cramp so much that they can't function, and then you're going to die, okay? So you want to make sure that you avoid the heart attacks. That's a weird thing to say. Okay, so the big difference between a stroke and a heart attack is that a stroke is a clot in the brain that is going to deprive part of the brain of oxygen. It's survivable, usually. In the heart attacks are much less survivable because they happen, you can die within a few minutes because if your heart is not beating because it doesn't have enough oxygen, the rest of your body is also not going to be getting enough oxygen, okay? And so that needs to be attended very, very quickly. So that's that big difference. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about the cardiovascular system you should know. Make sure you check your mind map and your labs, and see you later.